Okay, from the depressing topic of corruption, the C word, as Sherry Blair referred to it this morning, we switch now gears to our fourth plenary session on fostering innovation in Commonwealth Africa, a really exciting topic with one of the speakers we've just had, Mohammed El Gashan. We will also be hearing from Richard Follett, who is the Deputy Vice Chancellor of Sussex University, and will be one of our speakers. We will also hear from, who's flown all the way in from South Africa, Henny Bester, who specializes in the analysis of markets for financial inclusion, has advised governments across Africa, Latin America, and Asia. He was the legal drafter of the regulations for mobile payment service providers, including M-Pesa, which is one of the great success stories out of Kenya. After studying law and economics, he practiced as a qualified attorney for several years, was a member of the National Parliament of South Africa from 1991 to 1994, and if you know the history of South Africa, those were some interesting years. And later in provincial parliament for Western Cape from 1994 to 2001. He served in the cabinet of the Western Cape provincial government, first as Minister for Business Development and Tourism, and later as Minister for Community Safety. He participated in negotiations that paved the way for South Africa's first democratic constitution and chaired the Constitutional Committee that drafted the constitution for the Western Cape province, the only provincial constitution in South Africa. That is a very interesting fact. All right, so we will also hear from Bridget Anderson, the CEO of Big Innovation Centre right here in London. Dr. Anderson is the CEO of Big Innovation, a think tank that is focused on developing an innovation hub that promotes open innovation via challenge-led task forces, all party groups in UK Parliament on artificial intelligence and blockchain, it's quite a mouthful, and the AI Global Governance Commission. Since 2011, she has rapidly, through a strong vision, directed and grown the Big Innovation Centre to become a building block in the innovation landscape in the European Union and the UK, and not for long. And she is now the accelerating the Big Innovation vision with thought leaders, innovative companies that work with innovators in the Middle East, and she's become an entrepreneur and international expert in business model innovation, intellectual property governance, and the weightless and, quote, smart knowledge economy. She has appeared in a number of media highlights. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause to all of our distinguished speakers. We will recognize first Henny Bester to give his remarks, and then join us seated here on the stage.
Can you hear me, ladies and gentlemen? We have to shift this up. That sounds better? Good afternoon. Thanks, Joseph. It's an enormous pleasure to be here, and it's been a very interesting day, I may say. We've had perspectives from all sides and from all angles, and I've certainly thoroughly enjoyed them. It's my pleasure currently to, amongst others, run an organization called Insight to Impact. I2I for short, and what they try and do in sub-Saharan Africa mostly, but also a little bit in Asia, is to see whether we can use data to bring people who are excluded from the financial sector into the financial sector. And we do that through a number of ways, and amongst others, to work with financial institutions on the continent to see whether they're interested. Now, this whole thing was conceived around about 2014. And when we started out in 2015, we, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, went to big banks and insurers and said, you've got this wonderful data. You must really use that to develop new products. They said, who are you? We aren't interested in that stuff. We're making a lot of money. Thank you very much. And as we met with closed doors in Africa's big banks and insurance, we said, all right, well, let's work with the young innovators. And we started a competition called Data Hack for Financial Inclusion in Africa, which is very interesting. We started with 6 countries, we now have 7. We're in our 3rd season. And what we do with that really is 3 things. It's focused around a competition. It started very shortly, it's now a 9-month process. But we discovered very quickly that a lot of innovation in Africa and across the world is about data. And if you don't have data scientists, you're not going to have innovation. And we don't have many data scientists in Africa. So we started a platform where we train them. We train data scientists, we find them all over the continent. And if you don't know about an organization called the African Institute for Mathematical Sciences, go and look it up. It's one of the most fascinating, best kept secrets on the continent. And I'll say 1 or 2 things about them and later again. The African Institute for Mathematical Sciences has currently 6 centers in 6 countries in Africa, where they bring 50 postgrad mathematicians together for a fully paid 12-month master's degrees in math, and where they get the best mathematicians from the best universities, Cambridge and Oxford from here, Stanford and others, who come and teach for 6 weeks. And then they go out. And only 1/3 of them are allowed to come from that country, and 1/3 of them must be women. So you can speak to young Sudanese women doing maths and are passionate about maths. So we said, all right, you've got the mathematicians, we've got the data. How do we link you up? So we start training them on platforms. And we also bring other skills to young entrepreneurs. The second thing we do, and it's something which I really want to underline, we link organizations. Probably the 3 most important innovation centers on the continent at the moment would be Nairobi, Lagos, I would say Cape Town is slightly ahead of Johannesburg. And you find your concentration of both academic institutions, investment capital, and entrepreneurs clustered around those centers. The rest of the continent do not have that type of ecosystem. So one of the things I'm going to suggest to you later is that if Africa is to play a significant role in innovation, we need a virtual Silicon Valley in Africa. We need to link the best with the best somewhere else, because entrepreneurs are equally spread across the continent. The opportunities for entrepreneurship are not spread equally across the continent. And how do we actually link those two with each other? And then the other thing we do is, when we have, through a 9-month competition, delivered some of these young entrepreneurs, we've connected to the data scientists, we profile them. We give them a global profile, and some of them go places as a result of that. So that is what we do. What do we see? The Deputy Secretary General of the OECD this morning said that Africa is the most entrepreneurial continent. 20% was his quote, of all people of working age have to be entrepreneurs, but most of them are entrepreneurs out of force and circumstance. I want to tell you, there's a new generation of digital African entrepreneurs. They're young, they're 20 to 30 years old, they've got a bachelor's degree, they have seen what can be done with digital data, and you know what? They're starting to do that. And I think that is amazingly exciting. They have vision. But you know what's my disturbing thing? The young scientists of Africa don't have vision. I went to the African Institute of Mathematical Sciences students. I was asked to speak to them in Kigali. So I asked them, all right, now fast forward your life and you're 65 years old and your grandchild is sitting next to you. What are you going to tell your grandchild what you have achieved? And there was an absolute silence. So I said, well, will one of you be the chief engineer of the first African space station? Will one of you write the algorithm that will actually beat malaria in Africa? Will one of you be the engineer that worked on the super tube that links Cape Town to Cairo in 2 hours? And there was a stunned silence. And I'll come back to this issue again, that we have this wonderful generation, but they have not taken ownership of an African digital future. And how do we achieve that? The second thing that we see is these young people need extensive hand-holding. They may win a competition, but unless you abet them and put them in structures and give them continued support, it doesn't progress. Africa has a very thin innovation ecosystem. The oxygen for innovation in Africa is still very, very thin. And we need to intensify that. The third thing that I'm seeing, around every of these competitions we host them in Nairobi, Kigali, Kampala, Lagos, Cape Town, Lusaka, Dar es Salaam. Around every one of those competitions, there are cluttering of representatives. From where? From US, internet and digital platforms and data providers, and from Chinese institutions. There is indeed a very interesting scramble going on. I'm hinting a bit at The Economist this week, but that scramble is around data and platform control in Africa. And it's very interesting. I mean, the New York Times had an article in April last year where they said, well, the internet is likely to split into two. There's a Chinese internet, and there's going to be a US internet. Those of you who read the Financial Times this morning will see that game playing out, with the US ambassador in Germany delivering a letter to the German Minister of Economics, warning him not to work with Huawei to construct the 5G internet platform in Germany, because they will freeze them out of US intelligence. So you have these systems happening, and what I want to ask is, so where's the African platform? Does this mean that Africa has no choice about its own digital future? So one of the things we're trying to connect, we are bringing together these 20 to 30-year-old innovators from different countries, and we're putting them in the same room, and they love it. Because I said, you guys are going to develop the new platforms. Last year, we did a study of the new multi-sided platforms, which is buyers and sellers on Africa, the Amazons of Africa. It's interesting. We looked at only 8 countries. We found just short of 400 platforms. 80% of them were African grown. That doesn't mean the traffic of them were all African, but that's an amazing set of stuff that's happening. Let me finalize. 3 things we see as critical for the future. We need a virtual Silicon Valley for innovation in Africa. We need to link the best and the most innovative to the best and the most innovative. We need to link, we need town and government. Silicon Valley would not exist without the universities that are situated there, without the thick cluster of innovators, without the capital. No single center in Africa has all of that. We need to link them together. We need to create the virtual coffee shop to be able to create this future of innovation in Africa. Secondly, 80% of the innovators we work with have a business model which is essentially designed to broker a data relationship between a client and an established institution. And what we're discovering is that the role of brokering the relationship between Africa's population and a digital world is a business model that will have to grow and that will have to be essential into the future. And finally, Africa needs a substantive vision of its own digital future. Our view is quite simple. Africa will either lead or lock the 22nd century. Africa will either lead or lock the 22nd century. They can lead it because most of the young people in the 22nd century will be in Africa. They can lock it if those young people are rebellious. So what are we going to do about that? Thank you.
All right, Richard Follett, Professor and Deputy Pro Vice Chancellor, University of Sussex. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. We have an afternoon session here, so I know everybody is probably stumbling through sort of a bit of tiredness. So let's continue with the points that Henny raised a few minutes ago about creating a digital ecosystem or a data science ecosystem, as he referred to it. Because the topic that I'm going to talk about today is very closely connected. It's around creating an ecosystem, an innovation ecosystem, particularly in the area of higher education. Well, Africa is self-evidently, as we've heard today, a youthful continent. Nearly 41% of its population is under the age of 18. And I agree 100% with Henny's observation at the end. This is a generation that will lead or lock the world into the next 100 years. But to address the unique challenges of this enormous demographic structure, the African Union has adopted a 50-year Agenda 2063 to help guide the socio-economic transformations of the continent, and particularly addressing the needs of the youth across Africa. Well, one of the objectives of Agenda 2063 is to reposition the African continent as a strategic player in the global economy through improved education and the application of science and technology to international development. Well, the AU's Science, Technology and Innovation Strategy for Africa, or STISA 2024, provides an initial 10-year framework for pursuing exactly this role. Achieving the objectives of STISA 2024 will require, across sub-Saharan Africa, aligning education, research and innovation with the longer-term objectives of social development, which we've heard about today. Well, whether through innovation universities or just simply widening and deepening both the remit of public and private universities, fostering innovation within African higher education is a key imperative to realizing the continent's SDGs. Building capacity in science, in technology, in engineering and mathematics is mission critical to upskilling the skills base that will ultimately lead to either a virtual Silicon Valley or the kind of space initiatives that were referred to earlier. Reforming then and upskilling African universities to bring them into line with the objectives of STISA 2024 is perhaps one of the biggest and most daunting challenges for Africa's educational and technology transformation. The goals are considerable, mammoth in fact. Building and upgrading the research infrastructure of African universities, enhancing and upskilling professional, technical and teaching competencies, promoting entrepreneurship and innovation amongst staff and students alike, and also providing an enabling platform for developing sustainable higher education for the continent. The current low levels of investment in higher technical training and research across Africa is a profound barrier to onward development. And frankly, as a couple of observers have made earlier about the teaching, about primary and secondary teaching, in Africa. Unfortunately, far too few African universities have updated curricula or use teaching methods, pedagogy that promote innovation and, frankly, youth skills. The massification of African higher education is a challenge. Roughly 1.5 million students seek a place every year at one of Nigeria's public universities, but less than 500,000 get admission. Those who gain admission, and I'm fortunate to have held a visiting professorship at the University of Lagos, face packed campuses, stretched resources, compromised infrastructure, and outside of South Africa and Egypt, just one sub-Saharan university, the University of Nairobi, makes it into the top 1,000 in terms of international rankings. And it needs to be borne out at the very point, and I agree with His Highness the Oba earlier about the legacies of slavery. I'm a historian of slavery, so it kind of shapes my own mindset as well. But the legacies of colonialism on African higher education are profound. The University of Ghana, the University of Ibadan, the University of Dar es Salaam were originally branch campuses of the University of London, not even degree awarding institutions. It took until independence across Africa for a new stream of universities to evolve. Developing capacity from, frankly, a baseline which was kept by the British across the former Commonwealth nations at a baseline that was, frankly, zero, was a restrictive barrier on African educational development, and the legacies of that are still enduring today. Well, to tackle the unprecedented demand in African higher education, there has been, of course, of late, a massive upscaling and growth in higher education provision. The President of Ghana has announced a substantial increase in investment within higher education in that country. He's encouraging the creation of private universities. Nigeria's NUC, or the National Universities Commission, has openly stated that it wishes to open 100+ private universities. Ethiopia, which has one of the highest university enrollment rates in all of sub-Saharan Africa, is currently building 11 new public universities and has 80 private universities. When you consider that 40% of Ethiopians are under the age of 15, you just capture this demographic wave that is moving through the educational system. Well, I started working in Nigeria very extensively about 5 years ago, and I have the great honor of traveling to that country every 3 months or so. As I've said, I've held visiting professorships at the universities in that country and have an extremely close working relationship with Nigeria's National Universities Commission. When I first arrived in Abuja several years ago, literally with a briefcase stacked full of notes and well-thumbed copies of every higher education paper the NUC had ever released, and copies of Nigeria's 2020 national strategy hanging out literally of my briefcase. The conversations I had then with the executive secretary then and now shaped a profound desire on my behalf and on his behalf to shape an innovation ecosystem for higher education in that country. Well, at the heart of Nigeria's educational vision, as it looks forward through to the next generation and beyond, is creating a sustainable network of high-quality Nigerian universities, staffed by adequately trained, professionally equipped academics. The issue of brain drain of students are travelling to the UK and the United States will adequately supply a certain tiny proportion of Nigeria's youth. But that is not a national development strategy. as simply exporting the best and the brightest, many of whom will never return home. So at the heart of the NUC's vision was how to upskill its own Nigeria-based higher education system. And it recognised at the very outset that what was needed was creating high-quality, technically able academics, not just people with a PhD. Many of you have PhDs, but that makes you no good teacher. We understand that, who are in the profession, but we also understand that it's necessary to learn the skills of high delivery, high quality pedagogy that is suited for various settings. Settings where internet is not guaranteed, but teaching tools such as 3G enabled is far more of a usable resource, if you like. So from the very outset, therefore, we set forward with an agenda with the NUC to upskill its faculty base. And what they wanted to create was a train-the-trainer scheme across Nigeria, across the geopolitical regions of that country, a train-the-trainer scheme which would enable staff to come to regional hubs to spread good practice of pedagogy, to create, in effect, an innovation ecosystem within the university sector. Now, to do that, they came to us, and we are very well suited as a university for that. We're #1 in the world for development studies. We have a world-leading centre of international education. And from that very moment onwards, we set forward with the Ministry of Education's approval, with the NUC's approval, a train-the-faculty system that would deliver precisely on an innovation ecosystem. I could talk at length, and we can do so afterwards, after the session, about the other work that we've taken at the university, and I'm honoured to have my close colleague, Mr. Tosin Adebisi, with me today here at the event this afternoon. But the overarching goal that we had as a university was to create a sustainable global North-South partnership, precisely the kinds of partnerships that UN 2030 envisioned as key to developing African-led solutions for African-specific problems. Well, the NUC project, and I won't speak for much longer, is one example of a UK university contributing to an African-led innovation ecosystem. And I'm pleased to say that we're one of the most active universities worldwide now, working in Nigeria, developing this space, not in a recruitment capacity, but working in this space of national innovation. We're not alone. There are a new wave of universities emerging where innovation is at the heart of their visions. Institutions like Ashesi in Ghana, with its focus on creating or training ethical entrepreneurial leaders, suggest that they too are running down the track of creating a superstructure, if you like, of African-led, African-initiated university leadership. Universities themselves, and we've talked a lot over the day about leadership as a key problem here, as a block on development in many respects. African university leadership, as I've tried to indicate via our example in Nigeria, is beginning, sometimes hesitatingly, but beginning most definitely, to embark on the kinds of long-term institutional reforms that are crucial if the continent is to reposition itself as a strategic player in global higher education. Sustaining this kind of onward growth in public policy beyond one set of leaders, however, is a challenge. If you want a case study of dysfunctional public policy, you only need to walk about a mile from here towards the Houses of Parliament for dysfunctionality in public policy today. So it's by no means an easy task. And the key to it is, of course, that it isn't one generation, that it's multi-generational, because only multi-generational will lead that focus onwards. As Johann Schott and Callistus Juma argue, two innovation scholars, in creating an African-specific innovation model, it's imperative, they argue, that the continent does not try to mirror or simply follow the transformation model of the global north. African-led solutions, by contrast, that harness and use the productive value of northern partners, that use us. And that's what I'm referring to, that use us, are infinitely better placed to produce substantive, long-lasting change. By mainstreaming then, mainstreaming innovation, and by reframing the role of African universities, I thus urge, like Henny has done before me, that to create innovation ecosystems, we need to be thinking about context-sensitive, socially relevant issues, and ways that universities can make major, substantial steps forward in creating the kind of future for Africa that we envision. Thank you.
We'll now hear from Bridget Anderson, the CEO of Big Innovation Center.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. So, for me, this will be another ecosystem presentation, and I just want first to introduce the Big Innovation Center. We are an open innovation hub that ensures that government policy and regulation is in sync with technological opportunities and also technology adaptation into business and into enterprise, public sector, and into the general ecosystem. We are based here in London, we have an office in Riyadh, and we have an office in Dubai. And we also work with the Tunisian government through the British Council, in particular in relationship to creating a smart education system for primary and secondary schools. But my talk here is, I'll try to keep it short, but it will really be about developing innovation ecosystem. And I have a couple of comments to what I've heard previously as well I can take in. So we all agree, there's no need to say, that the new technologies is AI, blockchain, Internet of Things, robotics, high-value manufacturing. It's of course a growth driver for the whole globe, and all of that includes of course Africa. And also there's lots of studies showing how it can triple growth rates, so there are all these opportunities. Of course, how do we ensure that that actually happens? How do we build the innovation ecosystem? That's the question, it's not the opportunity. So we also can see it's very much of a qualitative change. It's not really like we're going to it's not a consumer revolution in buying more physical goods and things. It is actually more like a service revolution in having a better life and getting things delivered and consumed and lived better through digital technology. And of course, data is the new oil. We have also can all agree that the data is really the driver here. It is not minerals, it's not coal, it is really about data. So what have happened then globally, in all the global regions when they're trying to develop these growth hubs? And we heard Silicon Valley before, how of course Silicon Valley is very important and to learn from, and how they have really been developed through these kind of innovation linkages between universities and people of higher education and the rest of kind of the entrepreneurs. But that is just one model, and I'm not even so convinced that is the best model for Africa. We can also see, and that worked very well in Silicon Valley and in Boston. From Bangalore in India, they developed very much through a kind of very, very strong supply chains. And it's now a lifetime ago, or a generation ago, since they were just call centers and full of American companies trying to kind of play like 24/7 services, digital services. But now Bangalore has developed in its own right. And that was really by supply chain networks, not to be having the big company that dominates the supply chain networks. And of course now they have been developed and now have many huge companies China did it slightly different again. China did what they had a policy on they called economic and technology development zones, and that was heavy infrastructure investment into city regions combined with job creation and investment in innovation, and of course creating a better life. For them it was very important to make places nice places to live. The livelihood was very important. I was just 4 weeks ago in Eurasia, Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, Kyrgyzstan, Armenia. What are they doing now? I have to say I was shocked because it was probably like first time I went to China and you think you see a country in development and you see the future. Wow, they have it there already, they're much more developed than we are in many places. So going there and see, you think you go east of Siberia before Mongolia, it was amazingly high tech, very well developed, they're doing the whole thing, and I was there when 6 presidents was announcing technology, tech hubs, so accelerators and incubators across the 6 countries, all about GovTech, government technology, because they wanted to use government technology, GovTech as a driver for growth, because they were very heavy public sector, and they had a big vision, and it was amazing what already saw of GovTech already implemented. 80% of Kazakhstan is already digital, and they use only developed areas. So then you can go to places like Eindhoven in Europe. It's all developed around big companies. Philips Electronics, huge company, very dominant for centuries, or well, for 2 centuries in the city region. And now I have been responsible for whole regional growth, corporate development through that. And then finally, and then they now call it Brain Valley. And of course now it's not just about that company, but they have actually managed to get 40% now of research development happens in that region because of what they stuck, the catalytic effects. Then we can take Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, all these countries in the Middle East, UAE. They are now developing through what they almost vanity projects. They start, as they do in the Arab world, by building amazing city regions. The near 26,000 square kilometers city region, a building from scratch and say, okay, we cannot renovate what we have, let's start fresh. So we saw this is many different models. So I'll just summarize very quickly where I think the lessons come, because all of it is important. And to create growth hubs, all of it needs to be there. So we need to think about supplier networks. The tech hubs, as you heard, are very, very important. We need to make sure that they are there physically. I'm not keen on the online Silicon Valley. I believe physical, on-the-ground development. Otherwise, we can have a long-term problem. It has to come hand in hand, online, offline. So these tech hubs, talent into them, and again, primary school and secondary schools are very important because we've heard children very young, but also looking at really how we can accelerate by using these new technologies into education in primary and secondary schools. Very important. That's what we do with Tunisia, and we're also starting here International Learning to Learn Center for Excellence about primary and secondary school. I would be delighted if there's anyone here that would be part of that project. Entrepreneurial finance is important. There's no point in tech hubs if you don't have the finance. So we need to develop the financial ecosystem from business angel, venture capitalists, crowdsourcing, private equity, all the way to IPO. If there's no long-term financing, short-term finance, that's a problem. And we need to understand what we're financing now, not physical machinery, but ideas, business model, IP, and data. Demonstration areas for China, we really could see that, and I think Africa could really develop great there. Made it great places for demonstration areas to demonstrate the prototype, demonstrate the new technologies, demonstrate the best entrepreneurs for foreign direct investment. It always works. Very important. Build demonstration hubs, demonstration area, and I have visited many globally, and I think this is the way to get foreign direct investment. And the most thing, livelihood. The brain drain is not because somebody sits at home and thinks, oh, I want to have a PhD. The brain drain is because somebody looks out the window and says, I don't want to live here. So in order to keep people there, stop brain drain, make places nice. That's the whole idea. And for headquarter clustering, when you take hubs, when they develop, they will leave the headquarters unless it's nice. And I can just just come an example from North England. You know, Manchester, they develop these great new companies, and then they all move to London or to Berlin or somewhere else. They have to do something for headquarter clustering, where they come from. China did it very good. They kept Alibaba, they kept Tencent, they did the whole thing, headquarter clustering, back where it came from. That's where you will go from. The last thing I want to say is that GovTech, government technology, is the driver. If you need to find a technology to specialize in and you don't know which one it is, the GovTech is the big winner. We have missed it in Europe because we are specializing in every other type of technology, in AI and blockchain, in machine learning and all that, but we apply differently in marketing, entertainment. But GovTech, that was what they've done in Russia and Eurasia and China. Do GovTech, very important. And EdTech, education technology, and the last one I want to mention, disability tech. World Bank came out with a report, 15% of the global economy are disabled and have a disability that stops them from functioning at the workplace. Make sure that we use this new technology to create better lives. Disability tech is very important. And data governance, I'll not mention more of that. We've all heard the long talk about data here very first. But I just want to say that it's really about letting the data flow. User rights are very important, not ownership rights. So get over it. You're not going to, you might own your data, but you have to share the user rights. And then one thing I want to say, we speak about platform economy. I just want to mention that we have never seen companies grow as big as they have on the platform economy. Spotify's revenue exceeds Mauritania's GDP. Nike's profit is bigger than Cameroon's GDP. This is the profit. Coca-Cola's revenue is greater than Bolivia's GDP. Facebook's income greater than Serbia. Amazon is revenue bigger than Kuwait. Apple bigger than Portugal. And I could go on and on and on. Starbucks profit bigger than Trinidad and Tobago's GDP. This profit. And you can just come up with the first 25. The obvious ones, and then you look further, and then there are more. So that's what we need to look at. So basically, development and innovation ecosystem, GovTech as a new economic driver, education, data, competition, and think about the forms of competition with the big tech giants, how to break that competition, and this is all about data governance. And most of all, create places, beautiful and better places to live.
Okay, we will welcome Mohammed El-Dashan back to the stage.
How am I supposed to follow that? All right, well, thank you very much. Thank you to the three of you for saying everything I was going to say. But let me share a couple of points quickly, I guess. And I'm trying to take, I usually try to take the perspective of a small company. If you're a startup, if you're someone who has a good idea, where do you go from there? And what the experience is, having worked a bit with entrepreneurs and incubators and all that. But let me start ask you a question. What are examples of African innovation that you can think of? Sorry. Nollywood. Beautiful. Unexpected response, but again, beautiful. Which points to something I was going to say. Anyone else? M-Pesa. M-Pesa is probably the most common example given when we're talking about African entrepreneurship or African innovation. What happened? Anything else? Usually M-Pesa really is the example that is covered. Even though M-Pesa is more than 10 years old now. That's mostly what we come up with. But the truth is there are a multitude of fascinating innovations happening and coming out of the continent, either serving local markets, regional markets, or global markets, right? I can think of Off-Grid Electric and MCOPA that are doing fantastic work bringing off-grid electricity networks to people who are not connected to the national network. In Kinshasa, the Kinshasa Higher Institute of Applied Technique has created robots, traffic cops, that will monitor and analyze the data and manage traffic lights and so on to reroute traffic. Drone companies from South Africa to Morocco are helping farmers optimize their output, are monitoring costs for overfishing. Just yesterday, the World Health Organization has an annual innovation in healthcare competition, and the finals were announced for Africa, and they're absolutely fascinating. We are definitely doing some amazing work on things like medical technology, wearables, distant telemedicine, and so on. Now, all that being said, what we know is that unfortunately most of these will actually not reach maturity and will not be marketed. They will remain at the concept level. And that brings us to, well, what do you do after that first level? How can companies grow? And what we definitely know is that in Africa, or sort of across the regions really, is the problem that we have that's called the missing middle, right? You have a lot of really small companies. You have quite a large number of large companies, but you have this, and then there's a gap of medium-sized companies, and then the large ones exist. And we have a systemic failure in taking small companies into medium-sized companies. And a big part of it is financing, and of course I will not expand in this presence. I yield to them with this, but I will add one thing about financing I've worked before on a project that was trying to get banks to lend money to entrepreneurs. Because beyond, we have entrepreneurs fund themselves. The first thing is FFF, friends, family, and fools. And then you have equity and investment. And then there's lending, where people borrow money for their projects. And the lending part is systematically missing from a lot of the large banking institutions around the continent. So that's one thing I wanted to bring upon. I will skip most of the discussion on ecosystem, but I will add one more point. When we think tech, we think a lot, exactly as we were saying, we think AI, we think blockchain, right? We think telecoms. The truth is, there's probably not a single business in the world that's not technologically enabled one way or another. Right? The fact that the gentleman here mentioned Bollywood is very true. To make that industry happen, it is packed with technological advancements, and it is growing every day. And they're adopting new ideas and new techniques. Right? It becomes very difficult, especially when we rely on investment, especially coming from outside of the continent, for people working in sort of the non-digital spheres, but are doing advancements in their fields to find finance. If you are doing a project that is technologically enabling agribusiness, or that is, sort of improving an existing industry, but that is not a fully digital, you're not creating an app, you will find it extremely hard to access financing. We've seen that time and time again, with most notably some of the data we have is the data that comes from incubators. And this focus on digital in sort of the purest way of thinking of, blockchain and apps and websites and retail, distant retail, whatever, while oftentimes ignoring a large part of where the innovation happens, which is in other industries. So definitely there's a massive need in getting out of urban centers into rural areas, which cover a lot of part of the continent, but also outside of the strictly digital and into other markets that stand to that bring a lot of innovation and stand to benefit a lot from it, but yet sort of are discounted from our thinking when we think about innovation. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
All right, so we're running a little bit behind here, but we'll recognize a question. Is there any questions? Yes. I hope it's a brief question.
Thank you very much for your contribution. That's the Deputy Vice Chancellor of University of Success. I am very, very delighted at your passion and the fact that you've been Nigerianized, having worked with NUC and the various universities in the South region. The honest question I really want to ask, do you think the country needs more universities that will produce certifications, just essentially paper factories, or do we need a new kind of institution that will give skills that will differentiate between one that knows and one that does? because you know that there are Nigerians in Kano today that have never been to any school, and they've adapted the engine of a Nissan, put in a Mercedes, and the Mercedes drove, just to tell you how innovative they are, the Mercedes drove faster with a Nissan machine that was adapted by a roadside mechanic than someone that has a double PhD in mechanical engineering. So don't we think we need to rethink our so-called education to really human capital development, where every skill and talent given to any child in the country is assessed, developed, and then deployed for national growth. Thank you.
I couldn't agree more with you. I think you're absolutely bang on in terms of your analysis of where universities need to go. And at the outset of my talk, I mentioned innovation universities. And so one of the directions of travel that sort of development theorists suggest in terms of higher education is creating either very technical institutions, which are training roadside mechanics, etc., or creating the kinds of innovation spaces where entrepreneurship is developed. I referenced Ashesi University, which is really one of the African leaders in this area. But there are also that space of creating and deepening the public and private universities. That's to say, and this is a common issue within Nigeria, is the curriculum fit for purpose for the 21st century student? And that is a core issue, and it's one that the university sector is tackling. And there are regulatory environments, because the NUC, which has been a huge wing of support for us, is also a regulatory agency defining what can be taught in Zaria to Jos to Lagos, etc., ensuring that an engineering degree is fundamentally the same in each part of the country, at each type of university. And I think as universities evolve, as the educational map evolves, as we get more private universities emerging in the education ecosystem, I think we're going to end up with a more diverse portfolio. Some of the, if you like, bigger research universities, the University of Lagos, Ife, Abuja, etc., that they will retain this overarching cosmopolitan educational base, but we'll also see an introduction of more of the technical skills, but also some more of the perhaps enhanced entrepreneurial skills, which enable the kind of infrastructure developments that enable data scientists to link across the country. But I think your principal point is absolutely right.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I think we're going to have to leave it there in the interest of time, but I think some of the speakers are going to be around after if you'd like to approach them and ask a question. So let's give them a warm round of applause for bringing these very insightful views on innovation in Africa to all of us. Thank you so much.